The regular Navy couldn't stand us because we were so cocky and we did so many things that they probably wish they could do. But anyway, we were a unique bunch, and
so tell me, maybe if you want to talk about, we could start off on D-Day and where you started out, and a little bit about who was on your boat, and everything like that.
We started out in Solomons, Maryland. That was a training base for LCTs, and we went through a training session there on the I can't think of what is it, rough sea. Well, anyway, we trained on that and had our crew. Unfortunately, I got pneumonia in that terrible weather. That was winter, and was hospitalized for 31 days. I couldn't cure it, and I lost my crew. And so when I came out, I had a new crew, and that was in a way good, because the first crew I had went on to the Mediterranean, and the second crew we went through England and prepared for Normandy. And my first orders were to go, after Solomon's training, was to go to New Orleans and report to LST down there, because my landing craft was on the deck of the LST, and it is sitting on what's called sliding ways, huge timbers. They're greased, and the LCT was dogged down with heavy chains for the crossing. And we get over to England, and the English did not have cranes powerful enough to lift us off. So the ingenuity of the American, they had this way of the sliding ways. They were greased, and you undo the heavy chains dogged us down. They lift the LST to 20 degrees, and I get to chop the last cable, and the LCT goes shooting off the side and hits the water and nestles along beside the LST. So anyway, then we proceeded to various ports in England for experience. Our real home base was in the province of Devon, and we were up on the River Dart, which opened to Dartmouth, and that was our home base, and that's where our flotilla officers were located, up on the high banks of the River Dart. So then we proceeded to practice invasion. We went to various places, and on one we were in the notorious Slapton Sands. That's where the LSTs were on their way to Slapton Sands on maneuver, and the torpedo boats got them at night and blew up 3 of them. And one of them was the LST 621 that I had been on, and it was blown up to completely, with hundreds of infantry on board were lost. It was a terrible, terrible thing, and that was kept secret for quite some time, because they didn't want the Germans to know how successful they were. That, and the fact that there were also a certain amount of fear that they might have, out of all those people in the water, they might have gotten some top secret information on them. and that was devastating because in 2 days we were on the beach to be on the beachhead. So it was a terrible experience, and we didn't know, as we worked slapping sands, but all we saw was the damaged, blown up rear end, the stern of one of the LSTs that they had made its way back to River Dart, but we still didn't know what had happened. We just knew there was something terrible had gone on, but we didn't know what it was. And we didn't actually get first-hand knowledge of it until on the beachhead, about, I'd say D plus 2 weeks maybe. A Navy duck, you know what the ducks are, came alongside us, recognized our craft because he'd been on the LST. He was one of the few survivors, and he told us what happened. It was a terrible story. How the second officer tried to lift the mast off of the captain, who was underneath the mast, I'm sure. And he couldn't, and they all lost their lives, all the officers did, and as well as many, many enlisted men. And the terrible thing about the infantry on board had an unbelievably terrible experience. They hadn't been trained to properly operate their life-saving equipment, even their Mae West. Some of them had them on upside down, and they ended up in terrible shape. Of course, many of them died because of that. So, anyway, that was a few days before the actual landing.
And that was the LST that you went over on? Is that correct? With your LCT?
That's true. And I knew them. I'd bunked in with the officers, and
He gave you the wrong number on that, though.
We were not part of the LST crew. We were just passengers, more or less.
Right.
But the LST skipper, captain, gave me duty one time. He said, "McGaughey, go take the 0 to 4 watch." And that's in the middle of the night, of course, and I had never had LST experience before, and other than observing them from their control tower. And so I went up on, took the 0 to 4 watch, and we were in a big armada going across to see ships of all kind, and it was during a time when they were torpedoing a lot of them in these mass maneuvers, but we made it. I got through the watch all right, but it was kind of strange. I had a different captain. I shouldn't say this, but he did not have a happy ship. I don't have to describe it any further. He didn't help it any. He was, in fact, made it an unhappy ship. But that's not fair to say it. He died.
But he was the one who did. He was the one who died. Was he the one with the mask?
But he was a strange man.
He gave you the watch. He gave you the watch to go ahead.
Yeah, he gave me the watch to go ahead and do it, to perform, and he was a big, handsome guy that had come up through the Navy, through the ranks. He'd been a signalman, quartermaster, and so forth. And I'm sure in his back of his mind, he wasn't happy about being in control of the landing craft. He'd rather have a destroyer. You know, everybody wants a destroyer.
But Dad, you were following. You had the watch, and you were following along.
Yeah.
What happened as you were going along?
You have a bow watch at night, and during this time, no lights were allowed. of any kind, except the stern light was a little blue light that shows on the wake of the stern of the ship ahead of you. That's all you had for light. And so the bow watch, I would be asking bow watch, how are we? Are we closing? Because you know you're all in line, and you don't want to climb the other guy's stern. In fact, after several questions and some time going on, he said, "I think we are closing on the ship ahead." And I said, "If it gets continues, let me know immediately." So he did say we're closing, and I said, "Right 20, all engines stop." I never heard LST in my life. And, so I pulled out, made sure I was pulling out of the line, and laid there for a number of minutes, and we started up again and got back in. And I was worried all from that moment on what the captain down in there catching some sleep he needed. But when that drone of the engine stopped, all of a sudden, I thought, oh boy, he'll be storming, and I'll be thrown off the bridge. But he never said a word after that. So that was my LST experience. So I got training in various ports we'd come into, and so it comes down to loading up for D-Day, and as the afternoon, well, the day before we were to leave, the next day, and they pull us into the harbor of Dartmouth, and we open up our facilities, open up the bow doors and the bow ramp, and they load tanks on us and heavy trucks. We had I don't remember now on my information that my kids, the reason why I don't have those top secret things is my kids was afraid that I would lose them, because they would find them around, sitting around here and there, and
the invasion maps.
And they took them with them to have copies made. I don't have them. We were on our own. That's what gave us that cocky attitude.
Let's talk a little bit. How many were how many when you were making a trip over? How many were in the crew?
Yeah.
And then how many were you transporting? Do you remember how many soldiers and vehicles and like that?
Okay, the crew were 12 men.
Okay.
And all of them had a specific assignment. Like the gunner's mate would. He probably went to gunner school before he landed, so he was a motor machinist, a motor mech. Luckily, he had been to diesel school. He was one of the few in the whole group, and his superior would come down to our craft wherever we were and question him on a lot of things because he knew he was a good man, and so we had some experience in him. Of course, the cook was just whoever thought he could cook, and the rest of them were crewmen. She appointed the top crew man would be called a bosun's mate. That's using a term generally for higher class craft than ours was, but anyway, we call him a boats. And so that's how we made out with enlisted men that had, several of them were from New York, and you had no idea who they were. They just assigned them to you. They're yours. So you asked about that, and our capacity depended on what kind of a load we had. We could take anything. Like when we were on the beachhead, it might be a load of ammunition, all boxed up and put on. and we would deliver it, and many times before facilities were made for a real landing, for a quick landing, we would have to call dry out. The dry out term means that you go in at basically relatively high tide. As far as you go, your flat bottom boat is hung up on the sand, and you anchor it there. You're anchored on it, and you stay there until it might be overnight, until the next tide comes in, and you can get farther up the beach and they can unload you. But drying out was that was one thing. I had one little guy, cocky little fellow, from, I think he was from New York, but he was the joker of the outfit, just underage, I think, but he was a cocky little guy. But he couldn't stand the air raids at night. It got to him, and they had to leave it, have him taken off, because he was not good for the rest of the crew to have one that would go bananas on air raids. There was nothing you could do. You just had to hope you didn't get hit at night, on air raids at night when they'd come over. But we had, let's see, you asked about.
So let's say, maybe let's take it back to, on D-Day, did you go over one time or did you go over several times on D-Day?
All right, we all left our individual harbors. Got together out in the middle of the
Channel?
English Channel, yeah. And there we were still aware of each other in our group. We stayed close, so we were ready when they said, okay, there were 6 of us designed to go in, and they'd say, all right, you leave the rendezvous area and you take off. You can see the through the fog and mist and everything, bombarding smoke. You could see we were over 10 miles out. We could see the beachhead vaguely, and so we take off from there. Our 6 went off in line, not very close to each other. You purposely stay maybe 40, 50 yards from each other abreast, because you'd be too good a target if we were in close formation. But we all headed for the beach, and right in the at the pilot's quarters up on the top deck of the LCT, I had the photographs of the beachhead, because they were photographs made by and put together by, you know how you do that, put together by taken by little French fishermen who had of course their lives were threatened by it. They'd probably been killed if they caught them doing it, taking pictures, and somehow got them to the Navy. And they had a made up photograph of the beach, and you could see a church spire. You could see in this particular area there wasn't a windmill, but in other areas it was a good mark, a windmill. But church spires and certain articles on the beach back on land gave you a feeling that you knew where you were going. And we thought we knew where we were going. But unfortunately, the 2 vessels they had as pilots were sunk. The first one was about 5 miles out, and the next one was about 10 miles out, and they had both been sunk. So we had no way except our photograph and just our own feeling that we were doing right by heading for the beach. Our object was to unload the Army personnel and their equipment. We went straight ahead, and unfortunately, we had, of all of our training, we had not really been versed and aware of these high tides and what they can do to you. And we didn't realize that we were being swept away to one side until enough light came on and we could see the beach. It was about 6:30 in the morning when we to hit. And individually, I'm sure each one of us in that line, we were now 5. One was taken off for some other duty. 5 of us all went in, and we knew our job was to land equipment. And we picked an opening. They had given us an opening in the beach. They called them exits, where a road had been built up to go through the dunes, the big build-up of the sand dunes, go through them, and on causeways of type to go over the water. See, the Germans had pumped in water to make it difficult for any landing. So there was these lakes were what they had to go through beyond the high dunes of the sands. Anyway, we picked a road. I picked a road opening, even though it was a wrong one. You got to get these guys off. You know, they got a job to do, and we got off. I'll have an interesting story on how he got off, because the equipment on board had Lieutenant McGaughey, captain. He was a captain, Army captain, is in charge of the landing craft, the vehicles I had, and he had, where he got it, I don't know, a little fella called a weasel that it was more or less, I presume, a command piece of equipment. It had tracks on it, but it was small, only room for about one or at the most a second person, and that was his command. And he was, of course, he was proud of it. He had it setting on the very bow of the ship, of the landing craft. So when it opened, he could be the first ones. You know, he could just say, "Follow me," and the thing about it is, he conked out. As soon as he hit the water, he conked out, and there he was blocking the rest of them. And I said, "Good God, get him off there! I'm back. Get him out of the way!" And his men muscled him out, and I don't know whatever happened to it, but he didn't have his little go-go machine anymore. The fellas got ashore, and we didn't know till later that they had trouble. Of course, they had all kinds of their information, and it wasn't matching up with what they were standing on. And so they had a bit of a time, along with others, getting together because of the mistake in landing.
Did you land in the right place, Dad?
No, we made our own place. No, the right place was not visible. We had been drifted so far with that current was so strong that it had been pushing us all along and pushing us off. And we didn't have these patrol vessels that were anchored. They were supposed to be our guides.
So was that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it was a little of both. it was a bad thing for the army that got on. It took them a little time to get together and put their act together because it was of the difficulties. But the good thing about it was that the one the Navy had picked for us to go in, land on, and go in on Uncle Red Beach had heavy artillery waiting for us. And luckily, the landing we made and the opening we made was much lighter in equipment. So what we were facing were mortars being thrown in from who knows where, but they weren't right. They weren't dead ahead. They might have been wiped out by a previous action. I don't know. But the mortars were landing all around us. They had us zeroed in on mortars. And luckily none of us five were directly hit. We all took shrapnel damage. But luckily it'd be either on ahead of us or the big splice would be one way or the other. So we were lucky that they were poor shots. And it was... I had a close encounter with the ship, with the landing craft next to me. George Cress was the skipper of that one, and I noticed he wasn't pulling off, and that really worried me. And we laid to. I said, "We're going to lay to and see if he needs help." I was afraid he'd fouled up his anchor cable, because as part of the maneuver, these LCTs had a big, heavy anchor contrivance, and it had a heavy cable on it and a big motor run it. One of the crew would run that motor. So it was my job to determine when was the right time to drop that anchor. Because if you dropped it too soon, you'd run out of wire, you'd run out of cable, and then that was trouble. So you waited until the sand boiled up underneath to a certain point, and you say, okay, drop the anchor. And then you keep moving in, worming in, and then you use it to, when your ship is unloaded, then it is afloat. And this keeps you from getting twisted and turned around in the seas that was at the beachhead, and you draw on the anchor and it pulls you back straight. So a flat-bottomed craft cannot back by itself. They are notorious. You might as well admit you can't back up. You can't back. Yeah. And that's true. You use that to keep you straight. Otherwise, you go every which direction. So anyway, George Cress and his landing next to us, his motor Mac that was running his anchor engine realized the situation. Shrapnel had hit the gas line, and he didn't have any power at all. And he rushed down to the galley, I guess, and got a jar of some kind and got gasoline in it, and that substituted for that break in the line, and he was able to pull off. Otherwise, he'd have been there as a target for quite a while, and you don't want that. So anyway, we get back into the end of a certain rendezvous area where LSTs are, and I'd already been given orders to go tie up to LST such and such. So I come along to do that, and we are then to unload LSTs, and LSTs were not going into the beach because we are expendable, they aren't. They're a big target, and they didn't want them in at the beach that early. So we come alongside to recognized with their crew that we're ready to take them on, but they had never been on the operation called marrying. How we were to pull ahead, they're to open their bow doors and lower their ramp onto our LCT, and then they'd just run right off, and they'd be on mine instead of theirs. Well, they had never been on that maneuver, so come along and try to do it without them, without their experience and their men knowing what to do. And we didn't make it the first time. Their bow door tore a hole in the side of my LCT, and by then we'd had a rough sea. It was really a rolling sea. And so I said, pull off. We can't we don't want to get this thing torn up. We want to be able to use it. And a patrol craft came by and said, I know what your problem is. He said, get in there and get a load in there, they need you. I said, okay, we'll do it. And I put 2 of my best men on board their LST so that they knew told them what to do, because they had small anchor engines that they on each side, port and turn, and they could draw me out. Of course, my maneuver was to go ahead idle, go ahead idle, and they'd pull against the idle, and we'd get right up to them and where they could run right off.
So was their ramp supposed to go on top of your ramp? Was that it?
Our ramp would fall on our stern. By then we had taken down the bulkhead, 5-foot high bulkhead on the stern. They were off, so we were a run through.
So their ramp on their bow was supposed to go onto your stern? Is that it?
Last dropped on our stern. Yeah.
Okay.
So it was a very clever maneuver to utilize the LCTs to their greatest advantage. Mm-hmm. That was one of their last innovations that gave this the Mark 6 instead of a 5.43 or one of the previous. It was a very good maneuver.
So you did get the stuff off there. Finally, you got it. But they tore a hole in the LCT then.
It tore a hole. No, that bow door has an edge, right, and I must have caught the edge trying to get into proper maneuver with the sea being as rough. It was a heavy sea. Somehow it hit the side of it, tore a hole in the side of it, and it wasn't below the water line. Okay. It was above the water line. Okay. So I wasn't in trouble with that hole, but it could have been more trouble.
But somehow, with the help of your men who already had gone through those maneuvers with other LSTs earlier, so those 2 men went on the LST and showed them how to do that, pretty much?
No, they had been instructed. This man didn't know anything about it.
Right, yeah.
He didn't know it. He must have come just from England, and they said, "Hey, go on, you go on. We're doing it. You just come join us." And whether you've been on maneuvers or not, I have no idea.
So you were able to get the equipment from the LST onto your ship then eventually?
I was taking in his load, part of his load.
So what was it that you were taking in? Okay, now the first trip you made. Yeah. What time? That was really early on D-Day. You say that was right after the first wave had gone in. And what beach were you? What was the designated beach that you were aiming for, and where did you land?
Well, this is Uncle Red Beach, and have we got that picture? Shows where we
Utah Beach.
Yeah. Utah. Okay.
Utah.
Right. Okay. So you were on Utah. You were aiming for Utah Beach, but you hit it, but you hit a little different area than you were supposed to.
That's true.
Okay.
There's this isn't the one that shows the area we're supposed to hit, and that shows you adjacent to that where the actual landing was. Where they wanted us to hit was north of this, can't tell by, no, wasn't north of us, but we were a mile south to an inland road. It didn't show their inland
So you missed
road.
by 1 mile or so. You went
Yeah.
about a mile
Yeah.
south.
Well, by the time we got ashore, there's like quite a few times the infantry and the people we landed got to meet him. We didn't get to meet him for a long time.
But after you met him, did you have fun with him?
Well, they sent us to Brittany Peninsula. Brittany, they have areas like states, big states. There's Normandy and there's Brittany, and each big area has a name in France. And at a later date, maybe we'd probably worked the beachhead 2 weeks at least, and got orders for five or six of us, or had orders to go to Brittany Peninsula to support Cherbourg and Brest. So we got to leave fortunately got to leave the beachhead. By then it was just a great big working mass. I mean, you can see pictures of them. They're, it was just a port. See, you probably heard they pulled over, drug a bunch of old ships and made a harbor and put them in line and made a harbor out of them. As it would be a brick that made harbor was called by the breakwater. And that breakwater was very functional until the 17th day. They had the worst storm, one of the worst storms in history came, and even men that were stationed on that breakwater and saying were drowned some. It was a terrible thing. We were washed ashore, and we were able to get rid of the load we had, but we couldn't get back in the water and get away because a big old heavy log, flat bottom device came along and blocked our stern, and in fact drove us farther away from being able to get out. I couldn't get away from it, and it was sitting there until the beachhead. Finally, a couple of days before the beachhead got equipment over there and drug that big heavy thing out, put us back in business.